The Gemara in Shabbos brings the machlekes Fri Jul and Beishamai, whether over the days of Chanuka we are meisif v'haylech, we add neighbors. Fri Jul says the first day we like 1, the second day 2, the third night 3. And Beishamai holds peiches v'haylech. We begin with 8, and then the successive nights we go down 7, 6, 5, until the last night we light only 1. The Gemara gives 2 explanations to the machlekes. The first one is that according to Beis Hillel, the neighbors correspond to the Yomim HaYotzim, to the days which have passed. And the current day is considered among those that have passed. So the first night, 1 day has passed. The second night, 2 days have passed. The third night, 3 days have passed. According to Beishamai, the neighbors correspond to the Yomim HaNechnasim, the upcoming days. So the first night, there are 8 upcoming days. The second night, there are 7 upcoming days. And the last night is only 1 upcoming day. It seems pashut that we should assume that both Sidadim have merit. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. There's a strong argument to diminish, and there's a strong argument to increase. Halacha l'maisa, we have to do one or the other in practice. So therefore, we have a klal that whenever there's a machlokas Beis Hillel and Beishamai, we follow Beis Hillel. But the Beishamai's position has validity too. So we have to understand what is the underlying issue. What is the question whether we light according to the Yom HaNechnasim, the incoming days, the Yom HaYotzim, the days that have passed. Perhaps we could say as follows: that the days of Chanuka are days of great enlightenment. They are days which have a special skula, a special character, that we can achieve deep understanding of issues, problems that the rest of the year would elude us. There's a special gift that Rebbeinu Shalom gives, the special aura, the special light of the Yemei Chanuka. Now the question is, how are we meant to respond to that? I believe that there are really 2 appropriate responses. Number 1, we have to have a karas hatov. We have to have gratitude. It's a gift from the Rebbeinu Shalom. You have to be grateful. If you're not grateful, then it's taken away. We have to express our gratitude. In that sense, then of course, as Chanuka progresses, our gratitude has to be greater. The first day we have 1 day, the second day we've had 2 days of this great enlightenment, the third day 3 days. So in terms of our gratitude, we have to be more grateful. In the same way that if a person gives you a gift today and adds to the gift tomorrow and adds to the gift the day after that, so the hakaras hatov, the gratitude has to increase. Here too has to increase. There's another aspect of it, that this gift is mechayev, it obligates us. It compels us. And with each passing day, because there are fewer days left, there's a greater urgency. So the first night, you don't have that urgency that you have in the successive nights. Baruch Hashem, we have 8 days coming up. So we have 8 days of opportunity to achieve these great insights in Torah. Comes the second night, we only have 7 days left. There's a greater urgency. Comes the third night, we only have 6 days left. There's even a greater urgency. Comes the last night, we only have 1 day left. The light is diminishing. So there's even a greater urgency. So we understand that's the svara of Beishamai. Beishamai says that the idea of the Neiros Chanuka is to reflect the idea that this gift of enlightenment obligates us. It compels us. We have to respond to it. We have to use it. So therefore the first night there is less urgency because there are 8 days coming up. The second night there is more urgency because there are 7 days coming up, only 7 days left. And the third night there's even more urgency because there are 6 days coming up. The number of days coming up is diminishing. So the last day, we only have 1 day left. That creates the greatest urgency because it's now or never. So this is where the machlekes Beis Hillel and Beishamai. Beis Hillel looks at Neiros Chanuka from the angle of a karas hatov, gratitude. So of course, as each successive day passes, there's a greater debt of gratitude because the Baruch has given us more. Beishamai looks at the days from the aspect of the days being mechayev us, compelling us, obligating us. In that sense, there's a greater urgency as the number of upcoming days diminishes, and therefore to remind us of this greater obligation as the days pass to be more focused and more serious, so that light goes down, as if to say, we only have this many days left, fewer days left, until the very end. That perhaps is one approach to understanding the Machlokes Beisil and Beishami, and in that sense we understand the Eilu Veilu Devir Lekim Chayim. Both arguments make sense. Halacha L'maisa, we have to do one or the other. We pass like Beisil against Beishamai, but the truth is both arguments have a validity. There may be another aspect to this Machlokes. Let me share with you a Gemara in Maseches Avodah Zarah. The Mishnah of Avodah Zarah is talking about the Yomim Tovim of the Oyevdei Kechavim. The Yomim Tovim of idolaters, because there are certain halachas about doing business with idolaters on and around their holidays, and the Mishnah has to list the holidays. So, the Mishnah mentions two of them. One of them is called Kalanda, and the other one is called Satar Nura. Satar Nura. And the Gemara points out that Kalanda was a holiday that was observed 8 days after the winter solstice. The winter solstice is the shortest day, the longest night. So the 8 days that follow the winter solstice, when the days are beginning to get longer, there was a holiday called Kalanda. And Starnura was 8 days before the solstice. Just as the nights were getting longer and longer and longer, reaching their maximum length, so there was another holiday called Starnura. And these are the two holidays. Now the Mishnah lists them in reverse order. The Mishnah mentions Kalanda and then Starnura. It mentions the one that was after the solstice, and then it mentions the one that was before the solstice, which is in reverse order. So the Gemara says, V'simanech, the way to remember this is the Pasuk in Tilim, which says, Ochar v'kedem sartani. These are words that are put in the mouth of Adam HaRishon. You fashioned me after and before. The Gemara says, this is a reference to the fact that Adam HaRishon was fashioned in one way before the Chet, and was refashioned after the Chet. So it says, Ochar v'kedem, after and before. So we would have expected the order to be reversed, before and after. But here it says after and before. So that's the way to remember that in the Mishnah as well. The Mishnah mentions the later holiday before the earlier holiday. So the holiday which follows the solstice is mentioned before the holiday which precedes the solstice. Now the question is, but why does the Mishnah put them out of order? Good, this is a good memory trick. This is how I remember it. But why does the Mishnah put them in reverse order? So the Gemara tells a story that how did this holiday come to be observed? The holiday before the solstice, after the solstice. So the Gemara tells the story. Tana Rabban, Lefi Shara Adam HaRishon Yom Shmismayit V'Haylech. Adam HaRishon saw that the days were getting shorter. Let's go with the Pshitus, that the Tishrei Nivra Ha'olam. The Adam HaRishon was made in Tishrei. So from Tishrei onward, the days are getting shorter and shorter. The nights are getting longer and longer. So beyond the point, Adam HaRishon noticed that the days are getting much shorter and the nights are getting much longer. So he was puzzled and he said, Oili, woe unto me. Shema b'shvil shesarachti, perhaps because I sinned. I ate from the Eitz Hadas. Olam chashuch ba'adi, the world is turning dark. V'chayzer l'tohu v'vohu, and it's going to revert back to nothingness. V'zuhi misa sheniknas alay min hashemayim. Perhaps this is the death that was decreed upon me. As we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Adam HaRishon, if eat from the Eitz Hadas, you'll die. So perhaps this is the death. The death is that the nights are going to get longer and longer and longer and longer. And the days are going to get shorter and shorter and shorter until it reaches the point that all there is night, and that'll be the end. So, Amar, he got up, v'yoshav ches yomim b'tainis b'tfila. He spent 8 days praying, fasting. Kivin shurat kufas teves. When he came to the solstice, and he saw the days getting longer. So Amr, he said to himself, this is the natural cycle, this is the pattern. The days get shorter and shorter and shorter, up to a point, and then things turn the corner, you have the solstice, and then the days get longer and longer. He made 8 days of celebration. So the first yontif that historically was celebrated was the holiday after the solstice. Because that first year, the 8 days before the solstice, those were days of fasting and davening. So the original celebration was the 8 days that followed the solstice. The Shana Cheres, the next year, Asan La'elu La'elu Yomim Tovim. He made both Yomim Tovim, the 8 days before the solstice, the days that he had fasted and davened, and the 8 days after the solstice that he had already celebrated. So he made both Yomim Tovim. So historically, the calendar which follows the solstice was before the Satanura which precedes the solstice. Who kavim l'shem shamayim? Adam Rishon made them l'shem shamayim. V'hem kavim l'shem avodas gechavim. And the practice was borrowed from Adam Rishon, and it was extended by the Umas Ha'olam. And they, of course, made these holidays for Avodah Zarah. But as Adam Rishon observed them originally, they were l'shem shamayim. This is what the Gemara says. So there are a couple of questions over here. One question is, so why did he make it a yontif? In other words, he had made a mistake. He thought that this was a sign of his imminent death. Then he discovered minhago shalayla. So that's a cause for celebration. That's a cause for yontif. You discover that you made a mistake, and now you're happy that you were wrong. So that's an occasion for a yontif. We make yomim tovim when we have nisim. We have miracles, so we celebrate a yontif. Chanuka, we celebrate because there was a nace. But we don't celebrate minhago shalayla. We don't celebrate things being the natural way. So I understand why Adam Rishon was happy. Right? He was happy because he thought that he was going to die minhago shalayla. But that becomes already the cause of a celebration. And furthermore, we have to wonder, how did it happen that a yontif that Adam Rishon made l'shem shamayim, as the Gemara says, how did it come about that it should become a practice for Avodah Zarah? Because we would think that if a person does something l'shem shamayim, nothing bad should follow from that. But here it comes out, Adam Rishon made this observance mamash l'shem shamayim, and such a takala, such a calamity emerged that these should become days that were days of Avodah Zarah. How do we understand that? There's another Gemara. The Gemara says that this was not the first mistake Adam Rishon made. The Adam Rishon had made an earlier mistake on the day that he ate from the Eitz Hadas. On the day that he ate from the Eitz Hadas, he had never seen the sunset. And the sun was going down, and it was getting darker and darker and darker. And again he thought, perhaps this is the Misa that was Niknas Alayim Hashemayim. It says, Tan Rabbanan, Yom Shnivra B'Adam HaRishon, the day that Adam Rishon was created, and according to Chazal, he ate from the Eitz Hadas on the same day. Kivin Sheshaka Alav Chamo, when the sun set, Amar, he said, Oili, woe unto me, Shebeshvil Shesarach the Oilam Choshech Badi, the world was turning dark on that day, the first sunset. V'yachzer Oilam L'tohu V'vo, the world will go back to nothingness, and this is the death that was decreed upon me. So Yoshev b'tainis boicha kol halayla. That entire night he was crying. V'Chava boicha knegdo, and Chava was next to him. She also was crying. Kivin sha'olam v'rashachar. At the crack of dawn, Omar, he realized, minhago shalayla, this is the way of the world. This is the natural pattern. Remember, we are accustomed to it. We've experienced sunsets, sunrises. This was his first time. He didn't know. So Omar, he brought a carbon. Omar v'hikriv shor shekarnav kaidim leparsaisav. He brought a shor whose horns came before its hoofs. Now this is a very unusual thing. When a shor is born to a cow, so it's born with hoofs, but not with horns. The horns grow later. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the world, animals came forth from the ground, fully grown, standing in the normal position. So the head emerged from the ground, followed by the feet. And it was a fully grown animal. So the horns came before the hoofs. Because this shor that Adam Rishon brought as a carbon, to give thanks to the Ribono Shel Olam for letting him live, was one of the animals that was made in the Sheish Neirations. It wasn't a bull that was born to a cow. It was one of the animals that was created from the earth. So it was karnaisav, kaidmin leparsaisav. Its horns came before its hoofs. Now the Gemara tells us another interesting thing about that shore. The Gemara says, Amar Yudam Rashmuel, shore shehikriv adam arishin karen acha saislub mitzchai. It only had one horn. It didn't have two horns. It was a unihorn. It only had one horn. Shinamar, as it says in the pasuk, this shore is called in Tilim makrin mafris, horned, hoofed. So the Gemara says, but l'chara makrin is plural. So the Gemara says makron ksib. It's written chaser yud makron, which implies it only had one horn. So a very unusual thing that this shore, its horns came before its hoofs, and it only had one horn actually. So what is the significance of this fact that this shore was so unusual? It only had one horn. There must be some significance. And this was the shore that Adam Rishon brought as a carbon. How do we understand this Gemara? There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin in the fourth parak that talks about Adam Rishon. This Gemara was not by the Zara. The Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us some very frightening things about Adam Rishon. The Gemara says, there's one opinion that says, Adam Harishon min haya. He was a heretic. He was a heretic. There's another opinion which says, Adam Rishon Maishech Harlaso haya. He stretched his foreskin. And Adam Rishon was really born circumcised, but he stretched his foreskin. This was a procedure by which people could stretch the skin and appear as if they had not been circumcised. So Adam Rishon was a Maishech Harlaso. There's a third mandam where it says Adam Rishon was kaifer be'ikr. He denied the very existence of God. Very, very perplexing Gemara. The Maral explains the Gemara like this. It says in the pasuk that after the chet of the Eitz Hadas, vayischabe, that Adam tried to hide from the Ribono Shel Olam. And the question is, how do you think you can hide from the Ribono Shel Olam? How can you get away? How can you escape the Ribono Shel Olam? Now the answer is that Adam Rishon believed that the Ribono Shel Olam set up the world in such a way that it is subject to rules of nature. As HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself no longer has absolute mastery over the world. He created the world, but he set it into motion under laws of nature, and those laws of nature govern, and at that point, you can elude God. If the laws of nature, if the system which HaKadosh Baruch Hu set up allows for escaping from God's vision, you can escape. The Maral, of course, says this is the significance of giving Maishach Harlasa. Because as we've said many times in this year from the Maral, that the Arla is a barrier, it's a separation, right? It's a piece of skin on the male organ, which thus serves as a barrier between himself and the female. And therefore it's symbolic of separations b'chlal. It's symbolic of the separation between us and the Ribono Shel Olam. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avram to remove it. So the question is, what is that separation? What separates us and the Ribono Shel Olam? So the Maral says a surprising answer. He says it's teva, it's the belief in nature. In other words, people who believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the world, but then declared that it should be operating in harmony with fixed laws. So those people believe they have no direct relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam, because nature mediates between us and the Ribono Shel Olam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made a world which has chukei teva, which has laws of nature. We relate to that world. We manipulate, we use, we harness the laws of nature for our own purposes, but there's something which is a barrier that separates us and the Ribono Shel Olam. A person who has the worldview that there's hashgacha, there's providence, there's divine control, there's divine engagement, divine involvement, that is symbolized by bris milah. By bris milah, you remove the barrier that separates, and that shows that we don't have a relationship which is mediated by teva, rather we have a relationship which is direct. Because Adam Rishon Maishach Harlaso is the idea that he thought he could get away with his crime Because he believed HaKadosh Baruch Hu set up a world, and it operates under Chukei HaTeva. So, for example, let's say, in a very simplistic version of the argument, one of the Chukei HaTeva is you cannot see through opaque things. So if you hide behind the tree, I cannot see you. So perhaps HaKadosh Baruch Hu also is subject to those same limitations. If I hide behind the tree, he also can't see me. So it says they hid among the trees of the Gan. And Adam Rishon genuinely thought he could escape. Of course he knew that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu put this law into the Teva, that you cannot see through opaque things, there's no X-ray vision that comes naturally, so you can harness this law to elude capture by the Ribbono Shel Olam. That's what he thought. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but that's what he thought. Therefore, says the Maharal, what is that called? A person who believes that there is Teva, which mediates between us and the Ribbono Shel Olam, is a mashal also. He's a person who stretches his foreskin. He creates that barrier which the Arla symbolizes in himself and the Ribbono Shel Olam. So Adam Rishon was a mashal also. Now, we have to understand that once HaKadosh Baruch Hu is out of the picture, so what does that mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is out of the picture? So, one version would say that of course there is a God, but there are controlling forces. There's been a delegation to these controlling forces. That of course is the basis of Avodah Zarah. As the Rambam writes, that the earliest form of Avodah Zarah didn't reject the existence of a creator. It just rejected the idea of the creator being in absolute control. There can be subordinate deities, subordinate forces. So therefore, Adam Rishon could have merely been a min, just a heretic. Because he accepted the idea that there is a creator, but he believed there were subordinate forces. The other Man Damar says Adam Rishon went all the way. He was a kaifer baker, that he reached a point where he denied the very existence of the Ribbono Shel Olam. I don't think that means he rejected God as creator, but he held that God is totally uninvolved, totally disengaged from the world. So for all intents and purposes, there is no God today. So Adam Rishon committed this chet. He wanted to do tshuva for his chet. When he saw that he wasn't going to be punished immediately, he wanted to do tshuva. So he brought a carbon. So what type of carbon would be a tikkun for the chet he committed? So the Maharsha explains, the Nefesh HaChaim explains, that the idea is this, that a shore has a multitude of parts. There's 4 legs, only has one head. Only has one head. But even that head has 2 horns. Because what is the symbol of actus, of unity? That there is one God in charge of everything below. That there's no delegation, there's no separation. Is a shore whose head is first. That means the head is first and everything follows from the head. And even that head has only one horn. That's a symbol of perfect unity. And therefore, such a carbon is symbolic of the tikkun that Adam Rishon needed to achieve. And he brought that carbon. This is how the Maharsha, the Nefesh HaChaim understand the idea of that carbon. But this is the basic understanding of the Gemara, that Adam Rishon, his ability to commit the sin, was rooted in a fundamental heresy. It was to believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is withdrawn, and there are subordinate forces that can be manipulated, they can be harnessed, and of course, once you have that belief, it's very easy to slide down the slippery slope to Avodah Zarah itself. Adam Rishon, when he discovered that he was going to live, was very happy. He said, Minhago Shel Olam, this is the way of the world. He says, we could offer the conjecture that his tshuva was not a tshuva shleima. And many Mefarshim understand this in any case, because they question, why didn't Adam Rishon's tshuva help? We see that the gzeiros that the Kodesh Baruch Hu imposed on Adam Rishon never were reversed. The Mefarshim then can speak out. that the tshuva wasn't complete, despite the fact that he brought this carbon. See, Adam HaRishon thought he was living in a world, for a moment, where everything was determined by the Ribono Shel Olam. If it's getting dark, this is the Misa that was decreed up Hanem min Hashamayim. If the nights are getting longer, this is the Misa that was Niknasa min Hashamayim. And then he discovered, to his great happiness, that Minhago Shel Olam, this is the way of the world. Why did that give him happiness? Because Adam Rishon said, I'm not living in a world where what happens to me is a function of my schus, my chayva, my mitzvahs, my averis, my good deeds, my misdeeds. I'm living in a world which is Minhago Shel Olam, and operates in accordance with laws of Teva, which is exactly the chet that got him in trouble in the first place. And for him, this was a yontif. This Klal Yisrael doesn't celebrate days where the concept of Minhago Shel Olam is reinforced. Because Klal Yisrael yearns to have a relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. It says, we want to feel, we want to believe, we want to know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is engaged with us, He cares, He's involved, He guides our lives. That's precious to us. For us to live in a world which is Minhago Shel Olam, that things follow fixed patterns, fixed cycles, for us, that is a disappointment. For that, it's an abandonment. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't care, He ignores us. We're in a world that follows the unbending cycles of nature. That's not the type of world we want to live in. But that is the type of world that Adam Rishon wanted to live in. Because Adam Rishon did not want to live in a world where everything that happened to him was a function of his schus or chayva, because in such a world he was meant to die. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him that the punishment you deserve for having eaten from the Eitz HaDas is death. So Adam Rishon knew that if the world would be such a place where I have to live by my own merit, I can't live in such a world. I'm as good as dead. He says, I can only survive in a world which is Minhago Shel Olam. So when he discovered, that the sunrise, it rises undoubtedly every day, that's Minhago Shel Olam. Or that beyond the winter solstice, the days get longer, that's Minhago Shel Olam. That was the cause for celebration for him. He rejoiced. It was a tremendous yontif. He says, we wouldn't consider that a yontif. But put yourself in his shoes. Right? If Adam Rishon believed that he lived in a world where on his own merit he could not survive, because there was a gzeras misa, there was a penalty of death that was decreed upon him, and therefore he only could live in a world which ran in accordance with the principle of Minhago Shel Olam, so when he came to believe that in fact was the case, that was a yontif, that was a cause for celebration. But it's easy to slip from there into Avodah Zarah. Because once you believe that there are impersonal forces other than the Ribono Shel Olam who is on top of everything, so then you can personify those forces and believe there's a God of darkness and there's a God of light, and the cycles are a function of those forces in competition. And then it becomes Pashut Avodah Zarah. In other words, since Adam HaRishon's celebration was L'Shem Shemayim in a sense, but it was flawed because it was an imperfect conception. It was a world in which there isn't a perfect unity. So therefore, ultimately a takala came from that, and they became days of Avodah Zarah. But it's noteworthy, one very interesting thing, that Adam HaRishon observed two different holidays. He observed the holiday of the 8 days before the Tekufa, which is the pinnacle of the power of darkness, the power of night. These are the nights are getting longer and longer and longer. These are the longest nights of the year. And he celebrated 8 days after the Tekufa, which is the beginning of the Hisgabrus, the beginning of the overpowering of light, which is the opposite. It's a celebration of increased light. Whereas the 8 days before the Tekufa are a celebration of increased darkness. Because Adam HaRishon was celebrating the forces of nature. In nature, there are opposing forces. There's the force of darkness, there's the force of light. He celebrated both. He celebrated darkness and he celebrated light. So there was a holiday to celebrate the overpowering of darkness, and there's a holiday to celebrate the overpowering of light. So you might say, why should we celebrate the overpowering of darkness? Darkness is not good for us. The answer is because when does light begin to overpower? When darkness exhausts itself. So he celebrates the end of the domination of darkness, the last 8 days before the Tkufa, because that's when darkness will reach its pinnacle, which then will bring it to its downfall, where light can then overpower in the 8 days that follow the Tkufa. But this is really a celebration of two different forces of the Bria, the force of night and the force of day, the force of darkness and the force of light. Klal Yisrael also makes reference to day and night, but interestingly, there's a very curious halacha the Gemara says. In the morning, there's a bracha of Yotzer Or. We say every morning, the Kodesh Baruch Hu makes the light. At night, there's a halacha of Marav Arogim. There's a bracha, we say that Kodesh Baruch Hu makes the evening pass. But the Gemara says that there's a halacha that you have to be maskir, midas laila b'yoyim. You have to mention the night in the daytime bracha, and you have to mention day in the nighttime bracha. That's why in the morning we say not just Yotzer Or, but Yotzer Or Uvorei Choshech. And in the evening we say Goli al Or Mipnei Choshech, that God rolls away the light because of the darkness, but also Choshech Mipnei Or. He also rolls away in the morning the darkness because of the night. So the Gemara says we're maskir midas yoyim b'layla, midas laila b'yoyim. That in the morning we mention the night, and in the night we mention the morning. So why is that? First, I'll explain exactly this idea. That if we were to speak about just the light in the morning, just the darkness in the evening, that would imply that these are two opposing forces. So in the morning we praise the one, and in the evening we praise the other. It says we are serving the Ribono Shel Olam. The Ribono Shel Olam is the master of light and darkness. And therefore, even in the morning, although fundamentally we are speaking of light, we also have to mention the darkness. And at night, we mention the darkness, we also have to mention the light. Right? Abu Dram says this is the whole idea of saying Shema twice a day. Because we have to miyachad Hashem, declare Hashem Echad, at each different time, during the darkness and during the light period, to declare that Hashem Echad, Hashem is one overall, over both, the light and the darkness. Our Chanuka is an 8-day celebration, which also comes about the time of the solstice. The solstice nowadays is calculated as December 21st or December 22nd, which often falls out in and around Chanuka. But the Maral makes an amazing cheshbon. The Maral makes a cheshbon that in a certain sense the solstice is actually Chafei Kislev. He says because the world was created Chafei Elul. We know that Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei, was the 6th day of creation. It was Der Bria Sa'adam. But the first day of creation was Chafei Elul. And therefore, if you divide the year into 4 quarters, so the first quarter starts in Chafei Elul, the second quarter starts in Chafei Kislev, the third quarter starts in Chafei Adar, and the fourth quarter will start in Chafei Sivan. In other words, if you divide the lunar year into 4 quarters, and therefore he says that each of those quarters has a characteristic. We know that in those first 3 months, from Chafei Elul to Chafei Kislev, the days are getting shorter and the nights are getting longer. This is the period between the equinox and the winter solstice. From Chafei Kislev to Chafei Adar, the days are getting longer until again we'll reach the equinox in the spring. Right? From Chafei Adar to Chafei Sivan, this is the time that the days are getting longer until we reach the summer solstice, which is Chafei Sivan. Then from Chafei Sivan to Chafei Elul, this is the time again the days are getting shorter until they reach the equinox which is Chaf Hei Elu. So in other words, Chaf Hei Kislev, says the Maral in Sefer Mitzvah, really is the time of the equinox. Now this isn't precise, because the equinox is based on the solar year, this is a lunar year, the lunar year is 11 days shorter, but symbolically, the day of Chaf Hei Kislev symbolizes the solstice. So Chanuka is not just about the time of the solstice, it actually falls exactly at the time of the solstice, according to the Maral. The question is, but when we celebrate the solstice, we don't have two separate Yom Tovim. We don't have two separate holidays. Right? One to celebrate the nights getting longer and longer and longer until they reach their peak, and the other to celebrate the days getting longer immediately after the solstice. In other words, we just have one holiday of 8 days. Because we don't have like Adam Rishon had, like Rabbi Eliezer had 2 holidays of 8 days. We have one holiday of 8 days. So this holiday of 8 days really is like Chazal say, is because we combine the Midas Laila and the Midas Yom into one holiday. So Chanuka really is both the time that the days are getting longer after the solstice, but it's also the celebration of the time that the nights are getting longer and the days are getting shorter before the solstice. So therefore that's the Machlekes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. In other words, what should the emphasis be on? Should the emphasis be like Beis Hillel says, Ma'asav V'Hailech, because it corresponds to the time that the days are getting longer? Or is it like Beis Shammai, it corresponds to the time that the days are getting shorter, and therefore it's Peichas V'Hailech. The light is diminished. Right? The truth is, it's true, because we don't celebrate 2 Yom Tovim like Adam Rishon did, 16 days. We only have one 8-day holiday, because we believe that it's not 2 separate forces of nature. There's the Rebbeinu Shalom who's overall in charge of everything, and the Mela, that's why there's a Machlekes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, but L'Halacha we have to go like Beis Hillel. Just a possibility. The Medrash Rabbah says in the beginning of this week's Parshas Miketz, brings a pasuk in Iyov which says, "Ketz som l'chayshech," that the Kadosh Baruch Hu made an end to darkness. So before we see what the Medrash says, what's the pshut of question made an end to darkness? So the Mitzuda says it refers to dawn. It refers to dawn. Now we have a night, and the night comes to an end. Every day with sunrise. That's Ketz som l'chayshech. But there could be another pshat, Lefi Dvareinu. The Ketz som l'chayshech could be a reference to the winter solstice. In other words, the nights are getting longer and longer and longer and longer, till they reach a point, and it stops. The cycle ends. Beyond that point, the nights are getting shorter, the days are getting longer. That's Ketz som l'chayshech. That's the end of the chayshech. Meaning there's a cycle. There's a pattern, and when the time comes, it ends. Says the Medrash, that what does this have to do with Parshas Miketz? So the Medrash says 2 things. That this pasuk also refers to 2 other kitzim, aside from the Ketz of sunrise and the Ketz of the solstice. There are 2 other kitzim of chayshech. One is there is a Ketz for the time that the Yetzer Hara will be in the world. As we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in the world to be tested. So therefore there's a Yetzer Hara. And we think that how long will it be a Yetzer Hara? It will be a Yetzer Hara until we deserve that Mashiach should come, and then everything will be better, and the Yetzer Hara will be taken away. So how long will that take? At the rate it's going now, like a long time. Unless we'll ever get to it. So therefore we tend to think that the world will just continue as is, indefinitely. Right? There'll be Yetzer Hara, there'll be Nisyonos, there'll be Mitzvahs, there'll be Averos, there'll be Schuyas, there'll be Chayvas, until ultimately Klal Yisrael reaches the point where they'll be deserving of Mashiach coming. But it's not true. We know, the Gemara tells us, L'maskana in Perek Chelek, that there's a case, there's a deadline. And the Ramchal explains in the Sefer Das Tfunas, he says, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu prefers that we earn the Geula. And therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in the world with a Yetzer Hara to give us the opportunity to earn the Yemos Mashiach by overcoming the Yetzer Hara. But because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's love for us, there's a case, there's a deadline, there's an inevitability. It will happen. So when that kates arise, whether we're deserving or not, the Gula will come. Once the Gula comes, we don't need the Yetzer Hara anymore. Because the whole purpose of the Yetzer Hara is only to give us the opportunity to earn the Gula. But once the deadline comes, and there's an inevitability, and the Gula will come anyway, so there's no need for the evil. Right? No need for the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is only there to give us an opportunity to earn our bliss by overcoming it. But if we're going to get the bliss anyway, because the time has come, then the Yetzer Hara will be removed. So the idea of Kate Sam L'Chayshech means there's an inevitability of Gula. There's an inevitability of redemption and an inevitability of the Ra disappearing from the world, because the Ra is only here so that we should have the opportunity to earn the Gula, to earn our bliss. But if the Kate is going to come anyway, because there's an inevitability, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu in His Chachma decreed that the time that we should have to attempt to earn it is limited, when that Kate comes, the Yetzer Hara will be removed from the world. And the Ramchal says, this is the famous Gemara. The Gemara says, Shisa Alfei Shata Hava Alma, the world will only exist for 6,000 years. Right? Mashiach could have come at the year 4000, but because of our layers would already past. So we've already used up a lot of it, more than Chazal foresaw. Chazal were writing many, many years ago. But by now it's already 5,773 years. So we have very, very little relatively left till the end of time. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in the mind there's a case, there's a limit. Right? The limit certainly is not beyond 6,000. That would be sometime before that. But when that Kate comes, evil will disappear. So Kate Sam L'Chayshech, there's an end of the Yetzer Hara. There's an inevitability. And beyond that point, it makes no difference what we do, what we deserve. Mashiach will come, and evil will disappear. That's Kate Sam L'Chayshech. The other interpretation of Kate Sam L'Chayshech is it refers to Yosef. It says, Vayhi Mikesh Nasayim Yamim, after 2 years. Right? Yosef was remembered. The Saramashkim remembered. Paro had a dream, and no one could interpret it. And the Saramashkim says, when I was in prison, there was a Jewish boy there. He can interpret dreams. Call him up, and he'll be able to answer your questions. And sure enough, Yosef was called up. He interpreted the dreams, became the viceroy of Egypt in one day. So the Medrash says there was a case, there was a deadline. This was the time Yosef. It was nigzer on him, an extra 2 years in prison. As soon as the 2 years passed, he was released. So the Sfarim Akdoshim explain ideas like this. We tend to think that there was a tremendous upheaval in Mitzrayim. Paro, the king, had dreams. The dreams foretold years of plenty and years of famine. And this called for bold action, to store the grain, to tide them over, and so on and so forth. So we'd ask the question, like, why do all these things happen? Why was Egypt subjected to 7 years of famine and 7 years of plenty? So we would say undoubtedly there were some cheshbonos and shemayim that related to Egypt, that somehow Egypt had to have these experiences, and that's why they happened when they happened. So the Medrash says, no, that's not why at all. That's not why it happened. It happened because Yosef's term in prison came to its end. That was it. Yosef took out of prison. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged Sibis to get Yosef out of prison. So therefore, there were dreams, and there were years of plenty, and years of famine, and so on and so forth, all for the purpose of Yosef getting out of prison. That's Kate Sam L'Chayshech. Because the deadline had come. It isn't that if Egypt would not have deserved a famine, Yosef would have sat in prison for the rest of his life. It would appear. Right? You'd think that was the case. That if there weren't cheshbonos, that the Egyptians deserved to starve, then Yosef could have sat there who knows how long. He said, no, that's not right. It says, Kate Sam L'Chayshech, Yosef had to come out of prison. So the HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, okay, I'm going to set the ball rolling to create the Sibis for Yosef coming out of prison. Paro's dreams and the famine, the plenty. But it's all for that, because Kate Sam L'Chayshech, there was an inevitability, there was a deadline, there was a point which time Yosef had to come out of prison. So just like there's a deadline by which time Mashiach has to come and evil will disappear from the world, there was a deadline for Yosef. That's Kate Sam L'Chayshech. Everything is like that. That's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu set up the world. Things don't just happen because at a given time there are the causes that would provide for these things happening. There's a plan. There's a mahalech. There's a purpose. There's an objective. And when the time for the objective is realized, then the things come to pass. We always read Parshas Miketz Chanuka. And the idea of Chanuka as well is that Kate Som L'Chayshech. So we have to know, we have to be filled with hope that the darkness of Golos has an end. Now in the most surah which we sing every night, Chanuka, so there's a verse which is very, very frightening. We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring the Geula, Ki Archa Lanu HaYeshua, because the salvation has been long awaited. Ve'ein Kates Limei Hara, and there is no end to the days of evil. Ve'ein Kates Limei Hara. Because when we're in Golos, it seems to us that there's no end. There's no end and there's no hope. Even though the current Golos is very comfortable, but the reality is that even the current Golos has elements to it which seem intractable, unsolvable. The fact that the vast majority of our Jewish brothers and sisters are totally clueless, unaware as to Torah and mitzvahs and Shabbos and kashrus and anything. And how is that going to change? Because we can't even imagine how this is going to work. With all the investments in Kiruv V'Chaytnos being made, so maybe we'll be successful in winning back a small, tiny fraction of those alienated Jews. But the vast majority, certainly those that have already taken steps towards assimilation, intermarriage, how are we going to get these people back? It almost seems like a hopeless situation, and this is going to continue indefinitely because we don't understand what could happen. What could happen on a moment's notice that should bring it all to an end? But that's the idea of Kate Som L'Chayshech. It only appears to us, Ein Kate Limei Hara. But in reality, Kate Som L'Chayshech, just like for Yosef, the time came and that was it. And in one day, his fate was totally turned around from the deepest dungeon to the highest pinnacle of power. So it'll be in Yemos HaMashiach. Exactly the same thing. That Kate Som L'Chayshech. That in a moment, it'll go from the depth of our current state, which the problems are seemingly unsolvable, to the point where there'll be such a turnaround that even evil, even the Yetzer Hara won't exist anymore. And it'll be as wondrous as the Kate Som L'Chayshech of Yosef. But the symbol of that all is, I believe, the winter solstice. Right? This moment that Adam Rishon thought that this is the end of his life, and then in a moment it turned around and he stood that this is part of the divine plan. This is Minhag Shalaylam. He understood that not as I thought, that this was a pattern of decline that was going to continue on. Kate Som L'Chayshech, and there's a light. And that's what Chanuka is meant. And Chanuka, therefore, actually, as the Maharal says, falls out exactly on the day of the solstice. It's a preparation. It's a hachana. It's to prepare us for the prospect of Geula, to understand that there is a light. And this light of Chanuka that we kindle, these small flames, this is the enlightenment, this is the light which is the Rosh Mashiach, this is the light of the Achbis Hayamim, the light which will end the days of Chayshech. Even though it appears to us that in case there's no end, but we have Emunah, and Chanuka gives us the Emunah, gives us the Kayach to survive in Golos, to know that there is an end, and not just an end, but a glorious end that will turn itself around in a moment and bring the glory of the Achas Yom and Yemos Mashiach from Meher of Yameinu. So Chanuka is a time that really we can dream great dreams and be inspired in a great way and be filled with hope that the current situation, the current Golos should end, and Be'ezus Hashem we should be Zeicha to Geula, be as Mashiach, the bearer of Ra, Meher of Yameinu.